Hello and welcome to this very special interview. We're going to be seeing from a short while from now how the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will be presenting the interim budget, or a vote on account as it's called. What are the implications of this? What are the expectations of Indian industry? To talk about that, I have with me a very special panel. Mr. R. Dinesh, who is President of the CII, as well as Chairman of TVS Supply Chain Solutions. Mr. Sanjeev Puri is with us, President Designate of CII 2023-24 and Chairman and Managing Director ITC Limited. Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee is Director General of CII. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. If I can start with you, Mr. Dinesh, we know it's an interim budget. We know that there is, of course, a full budget that is expected later on in this year. But within the ambit of what we are looking at, what are the expectations and how do you think that this can, have an impact as far as our economy and fulfilling citizens' aspirations are concerned?
Thank you. So if you look at it, I think the expectation is that A, there is continuity. There is a clear direction given, and I think this government has been very precise in the way in which they set the vision for themselves. So I think to give the direction of how India is going to continue to be not just the highest growth economy or the highest large growth economy in the world, but equally in terms of how India is going to continue to be equitable in the growth and most importantly competitive as we grow along.
Right. Mr. Puri, this is, of course, as many call it, an election budget, because as we all know, there is, of course, a limited term of about 2 to 3 months that are left as far as this government's tenure is concerned. But you expect that the past track record of fiscal prudence is something you expect this government to continue on?
Absolutely. I do expect, and the government has been very clear in clearly articulating the fiscal glide path. And so far, they have been adhering to it. They have been very consistent. The vision is consistent. Excuse me. So I do expect this will continue. We also have a better situation as far as revenue buoyancy is concerned. High frequency indicators are good. So growth itself provides the momentum for the resources to be mobilized. And very clearly, I think the government has demonstrated, and therefore the fiscal glide path will be followed. And this is something that the CII is also, advocating.
Right. Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, one of the things that is often spoken about is the $5 trillion economy, not only ensuring that, but also ensuring that our GDP per capita grows significantly, because overall, that's the main metric. In terms of how the budget can deliver on that, I know this is a very wide-ranging question, but, that's one topic that many are very often seen speaking about. How do you view this?
No, I think it's relevant, pretty much so, number one. Number two, before answering, I'll also like to say, there are measures being taken during the budgets, the previous budgets that we have seen in the last few years. And we have seen many, many measures which have been taken between budgets, that is, outside of the budget. So some of it has to be outside the budget. So having said that, let me say, number one, what we would really like to see when you say per capita, etc., we'd really like to see a lot of focus spending of the government on, we've seen a phenomenal capex spending, which has really kept the economy going, India really on the top spot. But we'd also like to see the focus continuing on spending in areas like education and healthcare, especially in the rural areas. And generally, the rural economy to be focused on, be it in the areas of irrigation and so on, would be extremely critical when we see, look at the interim budget. The second piece is, I would imagine, when we look at how do we boost consumption, and India is a consumption-led economy. So I'd really like to see a lot happening through the rural sector on that. But coming back to industry focus, I would also see that industry can add a lot to it by creating livelihood. So the small and the mid-sized companies, which can employ a lot, and therefore small and mid-sized companies to be incentivizing them to grow, incentivizing them towards technology adoption, incentivizing them to even look at how they can digitally transform themselves, AI especially. I think these are certain things which we would definitely like to see in the interim budget, as we have seen in some of the in the earlier budget, a phenomenal strong focus on how India can be visionary in its budget statements.
Absolutely. And in fact, sharing its wish list ahead of the union budget, CII has already said that the centre should work on ways to simplify personal taxation processes like capital gains tax, filing of tax returns and others. Can you tell us and take us through this particular wish list that you've mentioned in terms of specifics of what the benefits for the Indian economy are? Because this has been a long pending demand. There have been reforms in the past as well. But what is the roadmap ahead that you envision?
So there are two elements to that roadmap. One is that obviously you make the tax simple. And obviously, if you have visibility of what you're going to do and you're not trying to optimize, between sections, etc., that itself is creating opportunity for better wealth management, if I can say so. The second is the benefit it gives on the consumption side. Moment you put cash in the hands of the consumer, then that's a methodology by which he or she is going to spend more when it comes to consumption. Therefore, simple, efficient, making sure you're not getting you continue to have the revenue buoyancy is how a good tax system works. And I think this government is very conscious of that. Therefore, we believe continuing that simplicity, and in fact, our recommendation has been, make it as simple as possible while making sure you have enough cash available in the hands of the persons. And I think just to add to that, if you look at the recent survey which we did, we found that the refunds are coming back much faster than before, which, as I said, helps from putting more cash in the hands of the consumer.
Right. And you've also recommended, in fact, as far as capital gains tax is concerned, a 15% short-term rate and a 10% long-term rate for various financial assets. The question that would you see this impacting in terms of investment decisions or even as far as market dynamics are concerned?
So I think the whole premise is on simplicity, because today we have a situation where within the same asset class, there are different norms for it. So really to simplify it, it will also make the process more transparent for taxpayers. It will make it easier to comply with, and therefore the issues about litigation or the issues about omissions happening, I think all of this will all get simplified. It's more aligned to the whole philosophy of the government also about ease of doing things, ease of living, ease of doing business. It's all aligned with that whole philosophy of simplicity.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned AI because, in fact, even as far as the mini economic survey of the Department of Economic Affairs is concerned, even that mentions AI. Now, in a policy statement such as the budget, how do you see this impacting? Because there are wide-ranging implications from, privacy to governments to, it impacting on a whole swath of issues. When it comes to the budget, how do you see this reflecting in terms of what the government's vision for such an important aspect is?
So, it's good you asked that because you see, as you rightly said, that AI it really cuts across. And we at industry, we are, of course, looking at its adoption, its entire story of digital in many ways, which has been so inclusive, which has benefited the bottom of the pyramid. And I think we can be leaders in the world even when we come to AI on that. So, when you ask a specific question how that can relate to the budget, and I would think a focus on AI can be mentioned in the budget. A lot can be again done from the budget thereon to even a national AI policy, say for instance, which would be extremely critical, important, and that would evolve over discussions between many stakeholders in the society. Even a huge issue like AI probably would need to be taken on in a mission mode, and that these are statements which are quite important that one would appreciate if one can see that them mentioned in the budget.
Right. One of the most important numbers coming out of this particular Department of Economic Affairs survey is the number as far as growth is concerned. They're talking about 7% as economic growth. The whole world is growing at about 2%. There have been those such as former RBI Governor Mr. Raghuram Rajan who've come out to say that it's virtually impossible for India to become a $5 trillion economy by 2025 unless there's a miracle that happens, and we need a 12 to 15% real growth rate over the next 2 years here. What, according to you, is India's potential growth rate?
So if you look at what CII has actually come up with, and it came a few months ago, was to look at a 7% rate of growth in 2025. So I think a 7% rate of growth and above, in fact, if I can say so, I'm more optimistic than 7%. So, crossing 7.3, 7.5% is what I think we should really be looking at as a rate of growth for us from an India context. Let us also not forget that if the whole world had been doing 4-5% and then we are at 7%, we may say that you could get to a higher rate of growth. The whole world is at 2% or even lesser in many of the developed countries. Then you are speaking about India at 7.5%. I think it's a fantastic rate of growth for us to achieve. And I think the economic survey itself very clearly says it's a $7 trillion aim by 2030. Our belief is that actually we will get there much faster as industry.
Okay. Recently, we've seen the IMF also praise Indian authorities, fiscal prudence and fiscal policy. They've also said there's a focus on accelerated spending when it comes to capital while tightening the fiscal stance that is expected. How do you see this impacting on economic growth and job creation? And are there sector specifics or projects that you feel that should be prioritized in this kind of a accelerated capital spending plan?
So I think this focus on building public infrastructure, both physical and digital, is absolutely the right strategy. It's absolutely the strategy to make India competitive, make India much more efficient, unlock the various inefficiencies, the various opportunities in the economy. And in fact, we are seeing the benefits of that already in many ways. If you look at it from a perspective of the cost associated with logistics, that is also visible. Now, we believe that this should continue. In fact, CII is suggesting that we should up it by about 20%. And the area, where I would think that maybe there can be a higher resource allocation compared to the past is rural, and that's where states also play a role. So the incentivization of states to kind of, also accelerate public spending for this creating productive assets, I think that should go up. And it does have a multiplier impact on the economy because it does create jobs, it does create consumption, and therefore also contributes to the setting up of a virtuous cycle to crowd in private investments. So I think absolutely on both the dimensions is the right thing to do. It's been a critical pillar of the budget. And we do believe that it has done well for the economy, and it will continue to be important as we go forward.
Well, that's very important that you mentioned, but what's interesting is last year there was about a 36% growth. You're saying you expect about 20%. Where do you stand on that? Because, year on year increasing massively as far as capital spending is concerned. Do you think that this is something that you expect the government to do this year as well, particularly given that it's an interim budget?
No, I would think that the government's continuity on capex spending is critical, important. It was a great signal. What is also to be seen is how we should appreciate how prudently it was done in the past. Say during COVID time, if you see, the rest of the world started doing all sorts of financing to get out of the COVID system. India did very measured sort of a calibration, if I can say, and thereafter this focus on capex spending really kept the economy strong. And you mentioned about 7% plus, not just going forward, but look at the past, the last 3 years, and look at what we're expecting this year and the next year when the forecasts are coming. So for that, I would think the prudence of that capex spending is going to be important. We need to keep it to capex. We need that, as was mentioned earlier in the panel, that the 20% that we spoke about. But importantly, I would see the texture of it, a special spending into developing rural infrastructure. That's going to be very critical. I would still think, spending on education and on healthcare. That's going to be very, very critical for the strong economy that we have built up and the stronger economy that we aspire to build up. These tenets have to be very, very strongly sort of focused on.
Right, but the same IMF report also talks about the converse, which is also the need for a comprehensive structural
path. All of it has been clear, has been articulated and implemented. I think if you look at, and I haven't read the report, so I won't want to go into the specifics of it, but overall, if you look at from the states, and some of the states may have a higher public debt, and that's where certain actions need to be taken. And incentivizing that or incentivizing the correction of that is something which this government has been doing in every budget, so to say. The electricity distribution, etc., were all done. So overall, it is balancing and making sure that every state in the country is actually pulled up to a level which is higher than before is what is best for the economy in general. And I think you have seen that success happen in some of the states which were termed as not being doing so well, and today maybe they are number one, number two in all of the ranking surveys which you see. So I would say it's a focus on making sure the everybody aspires to be best in class, and therefore you will have lesser debt and better managed finances of the states.
Right. One of the things that's also mentioned in this economic survey is a target by 2030 to make India a $7 trillion economy. Is this a practical sort of a target, and what should be done to achieve it in your view?
See, I certainly think it's a practical target. You see, look at what we are achieving today. As Dinesh said earlier, when the world is growing at a couple of percent, we are growing at 7%. Right? It is true that we can't grow our way through exports because there is some sense of deglobalization, there is some sense of the global trade actually reducing. But then there are lots of opportunities that India particularly offers, particularly for India. India is uniquely well placed. India has got stable macros. It has got scale to offer. It has got allied, the traditional services where India is strong, like IT, etc. I think tourism, there's enormous opportunity. That's a sector that the government is providing tremendous focus. I think agriculture, there is tremendous opportunity. We have the largest arable land. Of course, we do need to do some work on productivity and resilience building, which is also part of the journey with all the technology being infused, FPOs being formed. So all of this, whether it's agriculture, services, manufacturing, hold immense promise in India. And I see no reason why we should not be getting there. And, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in eating it. We're doing 7% with so much of challenges in the world. So when that also improves, naturally it will also help us to grow a little faster. So I'm quite optimistic about it.
So one of the criticisms in the past has been that focus on agriculture has actually reduced. For instance, the allocation, if I can just read it out, decreased from 1.33 lakh crores in 2022-23 to 1.25 lakh crores in 2023-24, even though the average annual growth rate of agriculture went down 3% in 2021-22 from 5.5% growth in 2019-20. So this has been a criticism in the past, and how do you see the government dealing with this particular aspect?
So you see, the government has tried its bit. The agricultural reforms have been pretty important, and we should see that being taken through. We would really like to see that over a period of time, number one. Number two, we also we spoke about generally even rural emphasis on rural. We talked about irrigation. I think that these are areas where we would like to see much more focus from the government in the budget. Third, I think we would also like to see how we can leverage technology again into agriculture. In today's global world context of climate, to talk about predictability, even research and development focus on crops and on climate resilience, and that's going to be also a critical area of our focus and work. The fourth, I would see how we are able to really bring in the states where agricultural reforms are very critical, and states need to actually fold into when the center has really tried earlier on agricultural reforms to be moved in. We need a much more of state buy-in, or state really coming into it to take those reforms forward. So those are critical factors for us to see, which will actually at the end of the day benefit farm productivity as well as the farmers.
Right. And one of the reasons I've actually asked this question is that the finance minister in the past has said on record that there will be a focus on youth, that there will be a focus on women, farmers and the poor in this interim budget ahead of the Lok Sabha election. So significant that this is happening ahead of a Lok Sabha election. What are your expectations?
See, 100%. See, we need equitable growth. And the four points which she has made is 100% essential for ensuring India continues to grow at a faster rate. you can't have one portion of the country left behind, and these 4 pillars are obviously very important pillars for the economic growth of the country. Women, for example, 50% of the population or 49% of the population, you need to increase their employment, you need to provide opportunities for them to grow, you need to create self-help groups, you need to create rural, better utilization of their caliber and skill. If you look at farmers, already much have been spoken about. The MSME sector is another core focus area, and they need to be supported, and they need to be ready for the digital transition, they need to be ready for the sustainability transition. So each of these are focus areas for
has increased to 6.8%. What can we expect from the budget in terms of stabilizing the food inflation in your view?
See, first of all, let me start off by saying that the government has been very proactive. They have taken a lot of steps to deal with it on account of, the seasonal variation, seasonal spikes that happen. They've taken tremendous steps, I must say. Structurally, you see, let's go behind the reasons. Why are we facing these issues? On one hand, one part of the story is also the global situation, the geopolitical situation, some parts of the world not being able to provide, the food grains, etc. The second is it's more on account of the climate emergency. So these are the two factors. Within those constraints, I think the government has done very well, particularly to make sure in times of inflation that adequate grains are available to people who need it, who are needy, and by ensuring that availability of the produce is widespread. They've taken steps, for example, to facilitate, for example, at times of tomatoes and onions and so on and so forth. So government has been, I would say, very proactive. What we need to do, I think, going forward, and I think part of the activity has already started, is how can we make our agri-value chains more resilient. So there are certain measures that, in terms of best practices, that can be implemented to deal with these extreme weather events. I think again here the government has been very proactive in disseminating this information. But there is, of course, it's a journey, and there is stuff to be done on R&D, there is stuff to be done on some other, practices and so on and so forth. So that's the journey that we need to go through to be able to adapt our agri-value chains to the extreme weather events. Right. But I think the two tools that the government is accelerating, which is the aggregation of small farmers through FPOs and thrust on digitization, thrust on bringing technology to agriculture. These are the tools that will ultimately solve all these issues systemically over a period of time.
Right. And my last question to you, two focus areas that everyone generally looks at, particularly in a country like ours, education and healthcare. What are your expectations in these two very important sectors which, are very, very important in not just our growth, but also in terms of, their own potential, in terms of what India can potentially achieve? How do you expect the budget to reflect on this?
One of the movements in both these areas have started very strongly. Let me first take education. We have seen the new education. I think we need to skilling up of it. So skilling up of skilling and getting future ready for jobs. So there are skills for the future, which are going to be very, very critical, and private sector can play a very